Imagine a world where the sun never rose, not because of a cloud, but because the sky was choked by the wings of 10,000 bombers. Imagine a secret so dark that even 80 years later the files are still locked behind reinforced steel. You think you know World War II? You've seen the black and white reels of D-Day, you've heard the speeches of Churchill. But what if I told you that the war was almost won and lost by things that didn't make it into your high school textbooks? From Hitler's obsession with the occult and wonder weapons that defied physics, to the American ghost soldiers who used magic to trick the Nazis. This isn't just a war story. This is the story of how humanity stared into the abyss, and for a moment, the abyss blinked. Buckle up. We're going beyond the trenches. This is the ultimate journey through the greatest conflict in human history. Chapter 1. The Brewing Storm and the Occult Roots. To understand the carnage, we must travel back to a cold, flickering basement in Munich. Long before the panzers rolled into Poland, the foundation of the Third Reich wasn't just built on politics, it was built on myth. The USA audience often forgets that the high command of the Nazi Party was deeply obsessed with the supernatural. They weren't just looking for land, they were looking for the Holy Grail and the Spear of Destiny. As the 1930s groaned under the weight of the Great Depression, a failed artist with a hypnotic voice began to promise the German people not just bread, but a destiny carved in stone and steel. While the Americans were building skyscrapers, Germany was secretly building a war machine in the shadows, violating every treaty known to man. Chapter 2. The Blitzkrieg Paradox. September 1, 1939. The world changed in a heartbeat. The Polish cavalry, brave but outmatched, faced a nightmare they couldn't comprehend. The Blitzkrieg, lightning war. It wasn't just fast, it was a psychological terror. Imagine the scream of the Stuka dive bombers, the Jericho trumpets, designed specifically to shatter the human mind before the bombs even hit the ground. But here is the part they don't tell you. The German army was fueled by more than just ideology. They were fueled by Previtin, a powerful methamphetamine. An entire army, high on drugs, marching for 72 hours without sleep. It was the first enhanced army in history, a terrifying tide of chemically induced energy sweeping across Europe. Chapter 3. The Miracle and the Ghost Army. By 1940, Britain was alone. The miracle at Dunkirk saved the soul of the Allies, but the heart was still bleeding. Enter the Americans. But before the boots hit the ground, the brains went to work. One of the most fascinating secrets for an American viewer is the Ghost Army, an unit of artists, set designers, and sound engineers. Their weapon? Inflatable tanks, giant speakers playing the sounds of moving divisions. They were masters of deception. They convinced the German intelligence that an entire army was where it wasn't. They won battles without firing a single real bullet. It was Hollywood at war, and it worked. Chapter 4. The Tech Race and the Wunderwaffes. As the war progressed, it became a race of mad scientists. In the secret labs of Peenemünde, the V-2 rocket was born, the grandfather of the Apollo missions. But there were darker projects, rumors of the Die Glocke, the craft that allegedly experimented with anti-gravity. While the Nazis focused on wonder weapons, the Americans were perfecting the ultimate silent killer, code breaking. At Bletchley Park and across the Atlantic, the enigma was being shattered. Every time a U-boat captain sent a message to his lover or his commander, the Allies were listening. The war wasn't just won on the beaches of Normandy, it was won in the silent ticking of the first computers. Chapter 5. The Architects of Illusion, the Ghost Army. Imagine you're a German scout in 1944. You peer through your binoculars across the Rhine River, and your heart sinks. You see it, an entire American armored division, hundreds of Sherman tanks, jeeps, and thousands of men moving into position for a massive assault. You scramble to the radio to warn Berlin.
But there's a secret. If you had walked across that river and poked one of those tanks with your finger, it wouldn't have gone clang. It would have gone hiss, because that tank was made of rubber and filled with air. This was the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, famously known as the Ghost Army. This wasn't a unit of hardened infantry. It was a collection of artists, sound engineers, and actors recruited from ad agencies and art schools in New York and Philadelphia. Their weapon of choice? Pure deception. The art of the fake. They used inflatable tanks and airplanes that could be deployed in 20 minutes. From a distance, even through high-quality aerial photography, they looked 100% real. But they didn't stop at visuals. They used giant 500-pound speakers mounted on trucks to blast the sound of tank engines and clanking treads that could be heard 15 miles away. They even went as far as spoofing radio traffic, creating a fake electronic signature of a massive army. These soldier artists would go into local French cafes wearing fake unit patches, knowing German spies were listening. They'd accidentally leak fake information about where the real attack was coming from. It was a massive, high-stakes shell game. Experts estimate that this single unit of creative geniuses saved the lives of over 30,000 American soldiers. It's the greatest story of fake it till you make it in military history. Chapter 6. Hitler's Wunderwaffes, the dark tech of the future. As the war turned against the Third Reich, Hitler became obsessed with Wunderwaffes, or wonder weapons. He believed that German super science could pull a victory out of certain defeat. And frankly, some of what they were building was terrifyingly ahead of its time. The V-2 rocket, the space age's dark birth. While the Allies were perfecting piston engine planes, the Nazis launched the V-2. It was the world's first long-range guided ballistic missile. It traveled at 5 times the speed of sound. There was no warning. One moment a street in London was peaceful. The next, it was a crater. It was the ancestor of every rocket that later took NASA to the moon. In fact, the man who designed it, Wernher von Braun, would later become an American hero, a complicated legacy of the Cold War. The stealth wing, the Horten H-229. Decades before the U.S. unveiled the B-2 stealth bomber, the Nazis were flying a flying wing. The Horten H-229 had no tail and was coated in a special charcoal glue mixture designed to absorb radar waves. If the war had lasted another year, the skies over Europe might have been filled with planes that Allied radar simply couldn't see. The land cruiser P-1000, Rata. Hitler's megalomania reached its peak with the Rata, a tank so big it was essentially a land-based battleship. It was designed to weigh 1,000 tons and carry naval guns. It was never finished, because luckily for the Allies, it was too heavy to cross any bridge in Europe. It was a metal monster that proved the Nazis had traded reality for science fiction. Chapter 7. The Occult, the Nazi Search for Ancient Power. You've seen Indiana Jones fighting Nazis for the Ark of the Covenant, right? Well, that isn't just Hollywood fiction. There was a very real, very eerie department of the SS called the Ahnenerbe. Led by Heinrich Himmler, this group was dedicated to proving that the Aryan race had once been a race of gods with supernatural powers. They weren't just looking for land, they were looking for relics. The quest for the Holy Grail. The Nazis sent expeditions to the mountains of Tibet, the deserts of the Middle East, and the remote corners of South America. They were searching for the Spear of Destiny, the spear that allegedly pierced the side of Christ, and the Holy Grail. They believed these objects weren't just historical. They believed they were power sources that would make the German army invincible. And the legend of the Die Glocke. Deep in the mountains of modern-day Poland, rumors persist of a project called the Bell, Die Glocke. Some conspiracy theorists and whistleblowers claim this was a secret experiment in anti-gravity or even time travel. While historians remain skeptical, the fact that the Nazis spent millions of Reichsmarks on fringe science and ancient mysticism shows just how far they had drifted into a dark, cult-like obsession. They were trying to win a modern war with ancient magic, and it was a gamble that ultimately led them into the abyss. Chapter 8: The Shadow Warriors, the OSS, and the Birth of Modern Espionage. While the Ghost Army was busy painting fake tanks, another group was operating in the pitch-black shadows of occupied Europe. This was the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services. For the American audience, this is a legendary chapter because the OSS is the direct father of the CIA. The OSS wasn't made of career soldiers. It was a collection of Ivy League professors, Wall Street lawyers, and even circus performers. Their mission? Simple. Drop behind enemy lines, nothing but a fake passport, a cyanide pill, and a mission to cause absolute chaos. One of the most incredible figures was Virginia Hall, a woman the Gestapo considered the most dangerous of all Allied spies. The catch? She had a wooden leg, which she named Cuthbert. She hiked across the Pyrenees Mountains in the dead of winter to escape the Nazis, all while carrying a prosthetic limb. She organized sabotage, blew up supply lines, and proved that the bravest soldiers didn't always wear a uniform. Chapter 10: Project Manhattan, the Race Against the Sun. In the quiet deserts of New Mexico, the most significant scientific gamble in human history was taking place, the Manhattan Project. For the American audience, Los Alamos is a place of myth. Under the leadership of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the world's most brilliant minds were locked away in a secret city. They weren't just building a bomb, they were trying to split the very fabric of reality before Hitler's scientists did it. The tension was suffocating. Every day, the scientists lived with the fear that Heisenberg, Germany's lead physicist, was months ahead of them. When the first test, Trinity, lit up the desert sky in July 1945, the light was so bright it could be seen for 200 miles. Oppenheimer famously recalled the Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." But what many don't know is the level of secrecy. Even Vice President Harry Truman didn't know the bomb existed until he became president. It was the ultimate black-budget project that changed the world's power balance forever. Chapter 10: Unit 731, the Horror in the East. To keep a USA audience engaged, you must touch upon the darker, grittier side of the Pacific theater. While the war in Europe was a battle of ideology, the war in the Pacific felt like a battle for survival. Hidden in the forests of Manchuria was Unit 731. This was Japan's top-secret biological warfare unit. The atrocities committed here were so stomach-turning that many files remained classified for decades. They experimented with bubonic plague, frostbite, and chemical weapons on live subjects. The most controversial part for an American audience, after the war, the U.S. government granted immunity to the lead scientists of Unit 731 in exchange for their research data. It remains one of the most morally complex decisions of the post-war era, a secret deal made in the name of national security. Chapter 11: The Rat Lines, the Great Escape of the SS. As the Reich crumbled and Berlin burned, the monsters began to disappear. This is the mystery of the Rat Lines. Thousands of high-ranking Nazi officials, including the infamous Angel of Death Josef Mengele, vanished. How did they do it? They used a network of mountain passes and fake Red Cross passports to flee to South America, specifically Argentina and Brazil. There are still rumors, tales that sound like a spy thriller about secret submarines, U-boats carrying Nazi gold, and high-ranking officials to hidden compounds in the Andes Mountains. This search for escaped Nazis fueled American pop culture for decades, leading to the real-life hunt by the Mossad and the legendary stories of Nazi hunters. Chapter 12: The Legacy of the 1940s. World War II didn't just end with a signature on a ship in Tokyo Bay. It birthed the world we live in today. the computer you're using, the GPS in your car, the jet engines in our planes, all of them were forged in the fires of 1939 to 1945. It was a time of ordinary farm boys from Iowa and factory workers from Detroit that became the shield of the free world. It was a time of unimaginable cruelty, but also of blinding light and heroism.
Chapter 13, The Fall of Berlin, the Twilight of the Gods. By April 1945, the 1,000-year Reich was reduced to a few city blocks of burning rubble. For the American listener, this is the ultimate climax, the moment the nightmare finally ends. Deep beneath the Reich Chancellery, in a cramped, damp complex of rooms known as the Führer bunker, the atmosphere was surreal. While 12-year-old boys were being sent outside to fight Soviet tanks with nothing but handheld rockets, Hitler was moving imaginary armies on a map. The final hours. The air in the bunker was thick with the smell of diesel and desperation. On April 30th, as Soviet shells pounded the ground above, Hitler committed suicide. But the real drama for historians is the chaos that followed. The werewolf plan, a Nazi idea for a guerrilla insurgency after the war, failed, but the fear of it kept American and Soviet troops on edge for months. Berlin wasn't just a city being captured, it was a civilization collapsing in real time. Chapter 14, Code Breakers, the Silent War of Numbers. If the soldiers won the war on the battlefield, the mathematicians won it in the shadows. This is the story of Bletchley Park and the American signals intelligence. Cracking the Enigma. The Germans had a machine they believed was unhackable, the Enigma. It could scramble a message in billions of different ways. They thought their secrets were safe. They were wrong. A team led by the genius Alan Turing in England, alongside American cryptographers, built the world's first electromechanical computers to break the code. Because of these code breakers, the Allies knew exactly where the German U-boats were in the Atlantic. They knew the German plans for D-Day before the German generals did. Experts estimate that the work of these nerds and professors shortened the war by at least 2 years and saved millions of lives. It was the birth of the digital age, forged in the heat of battle. Chapter 15, The Battle of Midway, 4 Minutes of Destiny. For a USA audience, Midway is the most legendary naval battle in history. After the tragedy of Pearl Harbor, the American Navy was reeling. The Japanese Imperial Navy was an unstoppable juggernaut, moving across the Pacific like a tidal wave. The gamble. Admiral Chester Nimitz knew he was outnumbered. He had 3 aircraft carriers against the Japanese 4. But he had one secret weapon: intelligence. American code breakers had figured out that AF, the Japanese target code, meant Midway Island. On June 4, 1942, the battle seemed lost for the Americans. Their torpedo bombers were being ripped to shreds. But then, in a stroke of what some called divine providence, American dive bombers arrived over the Japanese fleet at the exact moment the Japanese were refueling their planes. In just 4 minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were turned into floating infernos. By the end of the day, the 4th was gone. The back of the Japanese Navy was broken. It remains the most stunning underdog victory in naval history. Chapter 16, The Liberators, Stumbling into the Abyss. As American and Allied troops pushed into Germany, they were prepared for combat, but they weren't prepared for the truth. This is the emotional heart of the story, the liberation of the camps. When the soldiers of the U.S. Third Army walked into places like Buchenwald and Dachau, they didn't see soldiers, they saw walking skeletons. The smell of death was so strong it could be detected miles away. General Eisenhower's order. General Dwight Eisenhower was so horrified by what he saw that he ordered every soldier not on the front lines to visit the camps. He forced German civilians to walk through and see what their government had done.
He famously ordered photographers to document everything, saying, "Collect every bit of evidence, because someday some son of a bee will stand up and say this never happened." This moment changed the American soldier from a combatant into a liberator, giving the war a profound moral purpose that still resonates in the U.S. today. Chapter 18, Operation Paperclip, The Secret Integration. The war was over, but a new, quieter war was beginning, the Cold War. The U.S. and the Soviet Union scrambled to grab the best German minds. This was Operation Paperclip. Over 1,600 German scientists, engineers, and technicians were secretly brought to the United States. Many of them were high-ranking Nazis or SS officers. The U.S. government scrubbed their records because they needed their expertise in rocketry and chemical weapons to stay ahead of the Russians. It's a moral gray area for many Americans. The same men who designed the rockets that hit London were now building the rockets for the U.S. space program. It's a haunting reminder that in the world of global power, yesterday's enemy can become today's most valuable asset.
Chapter 18, The Nuremberg Trials, Justice in the Ruins. As the smoke cleared over the hollowed-out cities of Europe, a question remained that the world had never faced. How do you punish a crime that is beyond human comprehension? The Nuremberg trials were not just a series of court cases. They were the first time in history that a civilization put evil on the stand. For the USA audience, this is a profound moment of American leadership. Under the guidance of Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, the Allies decided that instead of mass executions, they would provide a fair trial, something the Nazis never gave their victims. The banality of evil. The world watched in shock as high-ranking officials like Hermann Goering sat in the dock. They didn't look like monsters. They looked like tired, middle-aged bureaucrats. This was the banality of evil. They argued they were just following orders, but the world didn't buy it. These trials established the Nuremberg Code, a set of laws that say some crimes are so horrific that "I was told to do it" is no longer a defense. It was the birth of international human rights law, ensuring that the shadows of the Holocaust would never be forgotten. Chapter 19, The Iron Curtain Descends, The Cold Birth of a New World. The guns fell silent in May 1945, but a new, invisible war was already being born in the rubble of Berlin. This is the moment the greatest generation realized that the end of one war was merely the prologue to another. The Great Divide. As American and Soviet troops met at the Elbe River, they hugged and shared cigarettes, but behind the scenes, the tension was ice cold. Winston Churchill famously declared that an iron curtain had descended across the continent. Germany was sliced in two. Europe was divided. The USA transitioned overnight into a nation of isolationists, into the leader of the free world. The Marshall Plan began pouring billions of dollars into rebuilding the very enemies America had just fought. It was a strategic masterstroke, turning West Germany and Japan into democratic fortresses to stop the spread of communism. World War II didn't just end, it shattered the old world and forged the modern map we see today. Every geopolitical tension we face now, from Eastern Europe to the Pacific, has its roots in those final tense months of 1945. Chapter 20, The Unsolved Mysteries, The Ghosts That Remain. To this day, 80 years later, World War II still holds secrets that refuse to stay buried. These are the mysteries that keep historians and treasure hunters awake at night. The Amber Room. Often called the eighth wonder of the world, the Amber Room was a chamber decorated entirely in amber panels, gold leaf, and mirrors. The Nazis looted it from Russia, and then it vanished.
To this day, no one knows if it was destroyed in the bombing of Königsberg or if it lies hidden in a secret mountain tunnel in Poland. The Nazi gold train. Rumors persist of a train filled with gold, gems, and stolen art that was driven into a labyrinth of secret tunnels in the Owl Mountains as the Red Army approached. Despite modern ground-penetrating radar, the gold train remains a ghost, a symbol of the massive amount of stolen wealth that was never recovered. And the final secret. But perhaps the greatest mystery is the human one. Thousands of soldiers remain missing in action. Every few years, a farmer in France or a construction worker in Russia unearths a dog tag or a rusted helmet, bringing a small piece of closure to a family across the ocean. Epilogue: a legacy in steel and spirit. World War II was the greatest catastrophe in human history, but it was also our finest hour. It was a time when the world was pushed to the absolute brink and refused to break. From the secret labs of the Manhattan Project to the invisible tanks of the Ghost Army, and from the courage of the Spy Queens to the sacrifice at Midway, this story is the foundation of who we are today. We live in the world they built, we fly in the planes they engineered, and we breathe the air of the freedom they died to protect. The echoes of 1945 are still fading, but the lessons remain. In the face of absolute darkness, the human spirit doesn't just survive, it fights, it builds, and ultimately, it triumphs.